I wish I had learned this truth many years ago. Be thankful for the days, good and bad.
All right, welcome to another episode of Warrior versus Zombie, and we've got another amazing warrior guest for you, Shiraz Baboo, and I want to introduce him in a second, but first let me tell you why you're here if you haven't been here before or if you've forgotten. Success is a journey, it's not a destination. As warriors, we all have a history of ups and downs, wins and losses that are all part of making us who we are up to this point, and they provide a foundation for our path forward. We all battle our inner zombie as well as those zombies in our world, and in each episode, I interview warriors who are aspiring leaders from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, artists, health practitioners, business owners, literally any inspired leader that has a story to tell. These warriors have a cause, they have unique value, and a vision that goes generations into the future, and today's warrior guest is no exception. Shiraz Baboo is an amazing warrior. He is an award-winning author, international speaker, and reality interventionist, which I got a little insight on his mastermind, but I'm sure we'll talk about a little more of that in the third segment. He coaches people to get out of what he calls reality addiction, and his book, How to Rewrite Reality, has changed lives across the globe. Shiraz helps his clients to annihilate their unconscious addiction to stories of struggle and lack, resulting in an abundance of free time, money, and energy. Shiraz Baboo, welcome to Warrior versus Zombie. I'm laughing because for whatever reason, I'm addicted to saying that differently, emphasizing the second syllable as far as the first. So we got to, if you've got a tick or an affliction, you might as well make fun of it and move on. So anyway, so how are things? You're in Toronto, so how are things there? We were talking a little bit before we got started.
They're kind of cool, but otherwise it's great being in Toronto. I love the city.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're, annihilated with or overwhelmed with right now here in the States is the whole election cycle coming up next Tuesday. So I don't consume a lot of media because generally they just want to keep you locked in the past and stressed out and all that stuff. So I don't do a lot of that. What's the overflow there in the northernmost part of the North America?
I mean, we hear about your elections all the time. It's actually quite amusing because Canadian elections, it's like 4 months before the actual vote that we start campaigning and the ads and stuff go up, and then it's done and it's over. But I've noticed 2022 elections, I've been hearing about them since 2020. You guys just start real early. So.
Yeah, it's a 2-year cycle here. Fundamentally, there's Congress people are elected every 2 years, presidents are every 4 years, and senators are every 6 years. So it's kind of interesting. So it's the people who run for Congress, once they finish one election, win or lose, they're gearing up for the next one. And then when this what they call off-year election, non-presidential election period, it'll be the next presidential election will launch right after this. So yeah, it's a non-stop thing, but it reaches a crescendo here in the last few months. So
yeah. I think it's like a different mentality because we don't want to hear about the elections until it's almost time to vote.
Well, I don't think you're that unique. I mean, I think that most of us here in the States would like to not hear about it, until it got to be closer to, because again, you got to stay focused on yourself. Anyway, that's kind of fascinating. Well, let's do this. I do want to make sure we have because I found your story, your focus, all that stuff pretty fascinating as we were having our mastermind a couple of weeks back. And so I really wanted to visit with you and kind of drill down on how you got in from where you started to into this, and then we'll go from there. So let's take a quick break, hear a little bit of our theme song, It's Not the Getting There by Ricky Jean Wright, and we'll be right back with Shiraz and Warrior versus Zombie.
But the miles become the teacher while the student learns real slow, traveling blind most of the time. Wherever you go, it's not the getting there, it's the journey every day. It's not a race.
All right, we are back. Shiraz, as I said before the break, I'm really interested to hear how you got into what you're doing today and how you started that and any of the challenges along the way. One of the things I want to say before we start here is I know your focus, or I've gotten to know your focus a little bit, is not being addicted to your story or your past. And frankly, when I talk about your story, one of the biggest challenges we have in this, in everybody that I interview are warriors. And warriors tend to focus forward, and we tend to gloss over those zombies that we've overcome along our journey. And the feedback we get is generally that people listening to this podcast really like to hear how you got through it, because they're all on their own challenge and they want to break that addiction maybe. So let's hear your story. How did you get into breaking people's addiction to the past? How did that story unfold?
What happened with me was when I was 22 years old, I was at university. I was studying to be a doctor and I was a bodybuilder. So everything was going great for me and everything was lining up. The world was my oyster, except the world didn't give me pearls. It gave me arthritis. Right. So within months, I was in intense pain in every single joint in my body, like every one of them.
Wow.
There were nights I'd sip my dinner through a straw because my jaw was so swollen and painful, I couldn't move it. And deterioration was happening, deformity of the joints, losing cartilage. Eventually, I got to a point where when I'm walking, I can feel my ankles and shins grinding against each other because there's no cartilage left. So that became my life. And you may not have gone through that kind of a physical trauma, but you can probably relate to having your whole life set up with a plan for what you're going to do, and then it's gone. It's taken away, and you're left scrambling, trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do with your life now.
Right.
So that's where I was. And there was all that anger and frustration. There was the despair when I realized this is what I'm going to be, my life's going to be like now. And the self-judgment, the self-pity, wondering, what did I do to deserve this? Why is this happening to me? What am I supposed to do with my life? And I was in that place of just despair for a while, but I've eventually picked myself up, started getting back into life, learned to deal with the pain, got back into the workforce. And at the same time, I was trying everything I could to get out of it. So I tried medication, I tried supplements and diet, I tried acupuncture and yoga and magnets and whatever I could. And nothing would stick. A lot of things would work for a little while and then I'd lose them again. And I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong or why I couldn't find the solution. I saw other people having success with medication or whatever, but it didn't happen with me. And it was almost 20 years of going through this before I met the man that would change my perspective, not just on arthritis, but on reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I had flown to India to meet this guy. And because it was India, I expected him to do some sort of that laying of hands. Hey, Shiraz, we're going to heal you now, right? So, but he didn't. He just talked to me for 2 weeks. It was like being with a psychiatrist, only he wasn't trying to solve anything in my life. He was just gathering the information of what happened. And at the end of the 2 weeks, he goes, Shiraz, you think you're responsible for everyone in your life. So I said, no, I don't. He said, oh, I know you don't think you do, but from everything you've told me, you've created this belief that you need to be responsible for everyone. And it started when you were 8 years old. Like that, well, I know I'm a responsible guy, but I don't think I'm responsible for everyone. That would be just too much. And then what does that even have to do with arthritis? He said, well, you don't want to be responsible for everyone. Yeah. He said, and if you're lying in bed in pain, you don't have to be responsible for anyone, and you don't have to feel guilty. If people see you're just struggling to get through the day, they're not going to ask you to take care of them. This is the solution to a problem you don't realize you have. So I just
Wow.
thought about that and I went, that's messed up. Like that's just so messed up. But he said, but that's what most chronic illnesses are, solutions to problems people don't realize they have. So I thought about what he said, and then I said, well, if what you're saying is right, then all I have to do is say I'm not going to be responsible for anyone but me, and I shouldn't have arthritis anymore. It should just go away. And he looked at me straight faced and he goes, yes. Mm-hmm. If you actually believe it deep down, then you won't need the arthritis. So I said, okay, I'm not going to be responsible for anyone but me. And when I woke up the next morning, there was no pain, there was no inflammation, I had more mobility, and I could even breathe better. So I'm freaking out, right? Because this doesn't happen. I can't go through this for 18 years and then overnight, boom, it's gone. But it was gone. And I was feeling great. And I had no explanation for what was going on other than what he told me. I didn't need the arthritis anymore. And when I looked into this, I found out this is not about illness. This is about everything, right? So your mind prioritizes avoiding emotional distress over being in physical circumstances. So avoiding guilt is more important than being physically healthy. So arthritis is the solution. But it applies to everything. If you are not making enough money, and you consistently cannot create the money you want, something keeps stopping you. And a lot of times it feels like external circumstances, because I was trying everything. I was trying medication. I was trying everything, trying to physically solve it. And things would work for a while, but then that caused me to start to go into guilt because I was in a position to help people. So my body had to create an immunity, which put me back into the arthritis. So if you have, let's say, a belief that if you have lots of money and there's other people suffering out there, it's unfair and you shouldn't be living the rich life while all these people are struggling and suffering, well, that's shame. So your mind's going to say, oh, I don't want to go through shame, so I'll make sure I don't make the money. Right? One thing a lot of people relate to is like, well, what if you make an extra $100,000 a year? Are you okay with people coming up and saying, can I have some? Can you invest in my company?
Right.
Are you using it right? Are you taking care of the family? Oh, no, that's a whole emotional turmoil for a lot of people.
Right.
So your brain says, well, then don't make that money. We're good.
Let me stop you for just a second, because I really feel like as we're talking here, that we're talking kind of a lot of what you're doing right now, and that's fine. The third segment, we're going to drill down into that a lot more. But I'm really curious, Shiraz, with I think the process of how did you get to that point and whatever. In other words, I assume now that you've explored or came to the realization and made that decision that, hey, I'm not going to be responsible for anybody else and that kind of thing. Yeah. How did that come about? I mean, I assume you've looked at how you got to that point in your story, maybe prior to that. Maybe this is the prequel to what we just talked about. How in now that 2 weeks and everything since, I'm sure you've been on, kind of a journey of enlightenment. Maybe you've covered it in your book, but how did that come about? What about your life led you to that point of your body giving you an excuse for being responsible for everybody and so on? How did that happen?
When I was 8, my mom had arthritis.
Okay.
And this little 8-year-old kid made a decision that, well, mom can't really take care of my brother and my sister anymore because she's in so much pain. So I should do that. And, there's only so much an 8-year-old can do. But in my mind, I need to be responsible and I need to step up for this. And So then I added in my dad, and then I added in my cousins because we'd host family get-togethers, and my uncles and aunts, and then I just started adding my friends, and it just kept going, and the belief went there. It did not help that when I was older, that I'm a very smart individual. I have a genius IQ, and so people saw that. They said, "Wow, you're going to do great things. You're going to be really accomplished. And when you do, we're going to be able to come over to your fancy house and live large with you." And so they were like verbally putting that response, saying, "Oh, I'm going to have to be responsible for them too." Now
They were opting into Shiraz's provision world, right?
Yeah. And it was just, a bunch of teenagers hanging around talking and stuff. They had they had no idea the impact it was having on my unconscious mind. But every time some conversation like that came in, it just anchored, oh, I've got to take care of everyone. And by the time I was 22, I'd hit critical mass. And my body's just like, nope, not going to do it. Right? As soon as you graduate from this university, you're responsible for everyone. We're going to make sure you don't graduate. We're going to solve the problem for you, and we'll do it with arthritis.
So you've overcome the zombie of health challenges, which is not a unique challenge. I mean, by the way, I have osteoarthritis and I'm dealing with physical therapy going through, and not to the extent that you're talking about. I assume yours was a rheumatoid situation that was causing the degeneration. But I know that, we're all mind, body, spirit, right? So, and we're a miraculous creation that can heal itself. I believe those things. But I also believe that getting that clarity and understanding what it is underpinning some of the zombies or the challenges is also something that you had to overcome. Any other challenges or any other things along the way that as you got to where you are today, any movement from where you were, where nobody could depend on you because you were sick, to today where you don't want to just be, I don't care about anybody. I don't care about, I mean, I know that, I can feel that about you. I mean, you're trying to, and we'll talk about more of how you're doing that in the third segment, but what did you have to overcome once you kind of had this revelation, and now you want to go forward having value? What other things anything else that you had to overcome?
It's one of the things that a lot of people have to work on is what are people going to think of me? Right? We're so worried about what everyone else thinks. And one of the things was when I switched out of studying to be a doctor to going, I changed my major to computers because computers were easy. I loved them and I could do them in my sleep, basically. And and that was another thing with the responsibility thing, because when I was originally studying to be a doctor, I thought that's what was expected of me. My dad was a doctor, my mom's a nurse, my uncles were all doctors. It was just the thing you do, and it's my responsibility to carry on the legacy of our family. All responsibility, right? And then with the arthritis, it gave me an excuse, like, I can't do that. Computers are easy. I have to do something that was easier. And I went into the field I really wanted to. And what was interesting there was I had a conversation with my dad about that, and I was apologizing to him. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to do computers. And he goes, I'm happy you're doing computers. And I'm like, you are? And he goes, yeah, I know you love computers. I don't know why you didn't sign up for it in the first place. And I said, well, I thought you wanted me to be a doctor. He goes, no, I just want you to be happy. So I put his whole story of what was expected of me on myself without ever having a conversation with him about it.
That's brilliant. Actually, that's one of the most, I mean, I get what you're focused on, but that's one of the most powerful things you said, because I know in my own experience, my son, my youngest, my son, we had a similar conversation because he really loved, radio, television, theater, music, everything. But I had a business degree. That was my claim to fame, right? Kind of like your doctor family, right? And he was very concerned that I would be disappointed in his choice. But we had this, very very emotional discussion. You reminded me of that. The other thing is when I retired 17 years ago, which also is aligned with what you're saying, is I did what I did for many years because I felt that that was what was expected of me from my kids, my family, everybody. And it kind of was, but it was more important to everybody in retrospect that I was happy, that I felt like I was fulfilling my purpose. But I had not ever asked anybody. I just assumed.
Mhm.
And as you said, you come to the realization it wasn't serving you, it wasn't serving me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's brilliant. Any other challenges, or are you ready to get into talking about what you're doing today?
I think those are the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah, those are big ones. Then that's good. And any warrior listening to this needs to reflect on those kinds of things. Well, let's do this. Let's take another break.
Mhm.
We'll hear a little more of our theme song from Ricky Jean Wright. It's not the getting there. And we'll be right back with Shiraz, and we're going to talk about why he's doing what he's doing, the value he's providing, and what kind of impact. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with Warrior versus Zombie.
It's not a race to see how many people know your name. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there. When you get there, you'll know. Funny how wisdom and youth are always.
All right, Shiraz. Well, that was brilliant. I love that. I kind of heard snippets of that when we did the mastermind, but talking about it again has given me a lot more clarity.
Mhm.
And so tell me, why are you doing what you're doing today?
Well, I enjoy seeing transformation in people. I and there's two sides of it. Number one, I love it, and number two, some people annoy me, right? Because on the other side of it, I can see the stories, and I'm like, do you realize you're in this story? It's just a story you're creating for yourself, the same way I created arthritis, and just a simple shift in the mindset can get you out of that story and into a completely different life. And so when I see this in the world around me, I'm like, I don't want to be annoyed. I want people to live happy lives without having to complain. And I do my best to try to help them through that. So and and I know it sounds weird, but every now and then, like I'm out there and I'm hearing a conversation, and I'm like, oh, it's just a story, man. It's just a story. You can change that. So
Yeah, you have your hammer now
mhm,
that you've learned through your own journey, and you've experienced success. It's almost too easy sometimes to see the nails that you can use, and then
yeah,
that does create a level of frustration. I can relate to that immensely, and I've worked with people running multi-billion-dollar companies to now working with individuals and entrepreneurs. It doesn't matter what your current impact or your responsibilities or what your pedigree is. We all have these addictions to our story, right? That
yeah,
and it's the inability to see that and to realize that we need to go back and reconnect with why we're here and the value and stuff is one that I often think, okay, that's great. I know you're trying to figure out how to do this or that, but let's back up and really explore. And that sounds like you're doing a lot of that on that level. So tell me, so how do you? I mean, what's your superpower? What is? I mean, I picked up already that you have a high IQ.
mhm,
Some people have high IQs and have no EQ. Some people have high EQs and no IQ. I don't mean that extreme, but
yeah.
but but aside from the IQ or your ability to see things, what do you think the unique value that you bring to the party is?
I'm basically like a human lie detector.
Okay.
So when you are talking, I can tell when your conscious beliefs match your unconscious beliefs. So I'm not checking to see if you're lying to me. I can see if you're lying to you.
Yeah, which is the starting point, right? We all tell stories to ourselves, and I do the same thing. I mean, none of us are immune from that.
So that helps when people are coming to me and saying, this is the problem I want to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So things like, I'd like to make a lot more money. And I'll be like, no, you don't. And they're like, what do you mean I don't? That's not coming up as true. Let's find out why you don't want to make more money. And then from there, we can go on an honest journey to find out why there's this unconscious belief that they shouldn't make more money, or they're not allowed to, or it would be a bad idea. And when we bring up the actual story that's running in the background, people can step out of it. So whereas it took my mentor 2 weeks of conversations to get to that one core belief,
Mm-hmm.
for depending on how deep people are willing to go with me, I've had major shifts happen for people in as little as 5 minutes, just from the conversations.
Wow.
Yeah.
That does it. I would like to say it surprises me, but it really doesn't surprise me, because I go through these epiphanies quite frequently, and I realize the disconnect between what I'm thinking and what I'm saying.
Mhm.
So myself, so that's it kind of doesn't, but that's cool. So when you talk about your delivery of your value proposition, or how do you do that? Or I mean, I kind of get the why, that you want to impact people, help them not relive their story, and, as I call it, disconnect from their zombie brain and let their frontal lobe and their intention flow. But a little different, but fundamentally the same. How do you go about that?
So during the conversations, excuse me, once people are aware of their beliefs, I give them the opportunity to change. I physically ask them, are you willing to step out of that story? And if you think about all our habits and patterns are based on neural clusters in our brains.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the neural clusters like a Jenga tower. So you've got blocks, and then crossways blocks, and they build up, and you've got this tower.
Mm-hmm.
When you are doing this kind of work, or any kind of mindset work, when you realize you've got a belief, you're pulling a block out of the tower. And then you might find another belief and you're pulling a block out of the tower. Now, in the actual Jenga game, it's like, how many blocks can I pull without the tower falling?
Mm-hmm.
But in this game, what you're trying to do is pull enough blocks so that the tower falls, except you never know what block you're pulling when you're working on a belief.
Mm.
So when you pull enough blocks, you can actually start to see physical changes show up in your life, and you can start making more money, or have better relationships, or become healthier. But if you don't pull out enough blocks to cause the tower to fall, and you don't continue doing the work, you start putting the blocks back in until you get a nice solid tower. And then you realize, wait, I was making progress and I lost it. Right? And you're like, what happened? I thought I was on the right path. You were, but then you stopped doing the work. So when I work with people, we keep going until I can see in them that that tower has fallen. And that way I know they're not coming back, because we talk about addiction. Putting those blocks back is you going into withdrawal from that addiction to that original neural cluster, and putting everything back in place. And it's like withdrawal from a drug addiction, a cigarette addiction. You don't realize you're in it until you start slipping back and you're getting the old results.
Yeah, and it's definitely not. And again, I know we have a common mentor, or common person we talked about before we started, Dr. Joe Dispenza. And one of those things is that addiction, because it can be to something that you don't want.
Yep.
Because it feels different when you hate your job, you go to work, you really, everything's not working for you, and then you start, all of a sudden things start to change, and you're not unhappy anymore, and you're not hating it, and all of a sudden your zombie brain, or that subconscious says, oh, this isn't right. No, something's, I got to fix this. And it'll go in the background trying to put those Jenga blocks, as you call them, back into place, right? I mean, if you don't keep disassembling that mindset. That's brilliant. So what else? What kind of impact are you hoping to have? Are you looking at? I know you wrote a book, and we'll talk about that, before we get off in the what I call the land of planes segment. What is your process, or how do you? What kind of impact do you not know what your process, but how kind of do you want to impact? Are you looking for millions of people? Just doing it on a one-to-one basis? And nothing's wrong. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, definitely millions of people.
Okay.
Right. Because I see people living in this addiction to a reality they hate. And the tools to get out of it are so simple, but they're not easy. So it's like, if you want to become a bodybuilder, you got to go work out at the gym. But how many people are actually working out at the gym? So
yeah, for a sustained period of time. Back to your point about, sticking with the program, because as the song says, it's a journey every day. It's not a race to see how many people know your name. Time can be our, if it's bad habits, it can be our downfall. And if it's good habits or good mindset or whatever, it can go upwards over time. So that's brilliant. Okay, well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. And there's a lot of things you've touched on here. And but when we come back, I want to kind of hear, if we take away anything from this discussion, what is the most important thing you want us to take away? So We'll hear one more snippet here of It's Not the Getting There by Ricky Jean Wright for the audio audience. And we'll be back with Shiraz and Warrior versus Zombie.
Funny how wisdom and youth are always two different games. The years flew by so fast, is the common human complaint. The memories in our minds turn to diamonds in our soul, and by the grace of God.
All right, Shiraz, it's been great so far. You have a very calming effect. I know people that listen to these episodes are going to say, boy, he's a lot more calm today. And so maybe that's also part of your unique value here, is you do have kind of a calm demeanor about you. So it's not that you're not interested. I can feel that energy. I know you're very intent on understanding. So, but it is a very calming discussion we've had here. So tell me, if we take away anything from this podcast, what do you want to make sure we take away?
So number one is that you are addicted to your current circumstances. So you have to work to get out of the addiction and get through the withdrawal, or else you're just going to keep falling back. And it's and it is simple to get out of it if you do the process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But one of the things I found is in order to really make change in your life, you have to be able to focus on what you want for about 30 seconds at a time or more. And most people can hold the thought for 7 seconds. And that's why most people aren't seeing the results they want, right? So 30 seconds doesn't seem like, oh, that's not a lot of time, but you try to hold a thought for 30 seconds, see how far you get. Right. And it can happen just like, okay, I'm holding the thought. It's been about 3 seconds. Oh, there, you just lost it as you thought. It's been about 3 seconds. Like, it's done already.
Well, I love it because our current world, the attention span in general, focusing on anything is, we're addicted to distraction almost. And I think that's brilliant. That is very much one of the challenges we have. The other thing you said that's brilliant is just focusing forward for a sustained period of time, as opposed to, that zombie brain, as I call it. We're all infected. It's not a pejorative. It's not saying anything bad about you. We all have that history, that tape running in our back that we're not even thinking about, that's pulling us to where our history will become our destiny if we don't change something, right?
Yeah.
And I know that I can tell that's kind of one of your fundamentals. So that's brilliant. So just realize that a couple of things is that the process is simple but not easy. I can see just in the focus on 30 seconds at a time. I think that's brilliant. What else? Any other things that you want to make sure we take away here?
Mental activity does not constitute thought. Right?
Yeah.
There's a quote that's always stuck with me, is that 2% of the people think, 3% think they think, and 95% would rather die than think.
I haven't heard that one. That's good.
Yeah.
So 2% of the people think, 3% of the people think they think, and 95% of the people don't even want to think or would rather die than think. That's an interesting quote. I'll have to remember that one.
You see people going through their daily lives doing the same routine over and over and over again. And there may be like thoughts that come up during the day, but they're just running the same program over and over. They are literally zombies doing their 9-to-5 jobs or whatever they're doing without real thought happening in their lives. And when you start to introduce real thought, you see real change. And that's how you know.
Yeah, it's amazing that 5% of the thoughts you process can control the other 95% if you engage that frontal lobe, or that intention, as I call it, on a regular basis. Well, that's brilliant. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously, we're going to have this up on the Be Connected platform. It'll be on the YouTube, it'll be a number of places. But how do we follow up with you, Shiraz? If we want to say, hey, I want to break my addiction, I want to at least hear what you have to say. How does our audience follow up with you?
You can just go to energeticmagic.com, and there's right at the top, you can book an appointment, have a session with me, so I can start to point out exactly where your biggest blocks are, and we can discuss where to go from there. And that's it. You'll find out that big block no matter what in that first discussion. So
awesome. Well, that makes it easy. energeticmagic.com. And for those that are coming to this, wherever you're coming from, I'll make sure we get that link in the show notes. So if you're driving down the road, you don't have to try to write that down, but we'll make sure that's available. Well, Shiraz, thank you for sharing with our audience. I appreciate that. We're actually, if you enjoyed this, Shiraz did a mastermind for my network a couple weeks ago, and it was awesome, and a lot of interaction there. And also, we're producing this one on the new Be Connected or Be Virtual meeting platform. So if you're impressed by this, you might reach out to myself or Shiraz and figure out how to get signed up for that for free. It can have an impact. But anyway, I really appreciate it, Shiraz. I did a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, it's always fun, and I'm glad to get to know you a little better. I'm sure we'll have intersects down the road, but for that, we'll land the plane here for this week, and we'll be back next Thursday with another episode of Warrior versus Zombie, another warrior, and we'll hear the final outro of "It's Not the Getting There" by Ricky Jean Wright.
It's not the getting there, it's the journey every day. It's not a race to see how many people know your name. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there. When you get there, you'll know. One day you realize time was worth more than the gold. It's not the getting there. When you get there, you'll know.